Good evening. We'll be starting in just a minute or two. Good evening. My name is Helen Sachs Chassett, and I'm the program chair for Next Generations. It is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's program, From Hate to Kindness. In December, Next Generations merged with Morse Life in West Palm Beach as part of their new Holocaust Living Learning experience. This opportunity for Next Generations ensures that our signature Holocaust education programs will continue to grow and thrive for many more years. Next Generations of Holocaust Survivors was founded in 2004, primarily by children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. As family, we support their authentic voices and are committed to keeping their legacies and memories alive. We're committed to sharing lessons of the Holocaust with the hope of mitigating bias, stereotypes, scapegoating, and cyberbullying. Our hope is that the next generation will become upstanders rather than bystanders. Additionally, Next Generations provides financial assistance for Holocaust survivors in need and presents programs for Holocaust survivor families who've experienced transgenerational trauma. Kicking off tonight's panel is Dale Vicki Atkins. Dale is a licensed psychologist with more than 40 years of experience as a relationship expert, focusing on families, wellness, managing stress, and living a balanced, meaningful life. Author of 7 books and many chapters, articles, and journals for popular and professional audiences, Dale is a featured speaker who lectures and leads seminars worldwide. Dale has appeared regularly on NBC's Today and CNN. Dale has a private psychology practice in New York City and has been a member of and advisor to several nonprofit boards, including Jumpstart for Young Children. She has 2 children and 6 grandchildren and lives in Connecticut. Dale is the co-author of the book, The Kindness Advantage, Cultivating Compassionate and Connected Children. Here's a copy of that book. Everyday Ideas for Raising Kids Who Care. The book presents the research behind the fundamentals of kindness. And tonight we will explore with our own Holocaust survivor and 2nd and 3rd generation panelists what they learned about kindness from their parents and grandparents. Joining Dale are our guest panelists. Saul Blau was born in Hungary and taken to Auschwitz as a young teenager. Surviving Auschwitz, Buchenwald, and several death marches, he returned to Hungary to learn of what happened to his family. In 1948, he emigrated to Israel, where he served in the Israeli Air Force, and in 1956, he moved to the United States, where he was a tool and die maker and owned his own business. Saul has 2 sons and 4 grandchildren. Our 2nd generation guest is Saul's son, Robert Blau, an executive editor at Bloomberg LP and former co-chair of the Pulitzer Prize Board. Representing the 3rd generation tonight is Julie Peresky, president and co-founder of Longevity Wellness and co-founder of 3G Miami, Descendants of Holocaust Survivors. Julie is the granddaughter of 2 Holocaust survivors. If during our chat tonight, if you have any questions for members of the panel, please post them in the chat and we will try to get to as many as possible. So Dale, start us off tonight and tell us a little bit about the research, what the research has found in how kindness is developed in young people.
Thank you, Helen. And it's wonderful to be here with you and Robert and Julie and Saul. And thank you for putting this together and for having me join you. The research tells us that, quite simply, when you talk to your kids about giving to others and you provide them with opportunities to do so, they are much more likely to be happy and to have a positive influence on the world. The research shows us that kindness leads to a lot of good things like compassion and happiness and future success and better relationships, improved self-esteem in children, and very good mental and physical and emotional health. The thing about kindness, and this is what I love to talk about when we talk about the research, is that it doesn't really need to be taught anew, but rather supported and nurtured from a very early age. And it's never too early to start modeling, to start reinforcing, and to incorporating kindness into our everyday lives. Dr. Paul Bloom, who's a psychologist at what we call the Yale Baby Lab, notes that at birth, babies are endowed with compassion and empathy and the beginnings of a sense of fairness, kind of they're getting on their moral road. And the earliest signs of this in children are hints of empathy and compassion because they note the pain of others, particularly the distress in their mothers when they sense that. And you can see this rather soon after birth. It's remarkable. The research also guides us that once children are capable of coordinated movements, they will start to soothe others. They will reach out. They will try to pat, to stroke. And research with very young children shows that they respond empathically to others when they are in distress. And babies' brains are very malleable. They're more plastic than adult brains. So as we try to infuse them with kindness and opportunities to be kind and reinforce their kindness, we are really helping to set these neural pathways in a way that we can develop kindness and nurture the kindness within them. You mentioned empathy, and empathy is one of the foundations of kindness. It's the connection with another person that enables us to feel and to experience what they might be feeling and thinking. And when we focus on the feelings of others, we are planting those roots of empathy. Along with empathy, in our own research, when Amanda Salzauer and I were writing The Kindness Advantage, we came upon other fundamentals of kindness, and they were acceptance and commitment and connection and interest and giving and nurturing, observing, questioning, and being yourself. Another area where there's an enormous amount of research, particularly now, and it's starting to be more common with children, is about expressing gratitude. So that performing positive activities, such as expressing gratitude and doing acts of kindness, actually boosts happiness and connection in children. And in a study where children were performing regular acts of kindness, those children showed positive changes in their academic performance and also were more socially accepted than kids who were not being watched for their acts of kindness. So from engaging in the acts of kindness, these children also seem to be more inclusive and less likely to bully other kids when they're teens. So doing acts of kindness develops an awareness of and a sensitivity to other people. And when we have concern for others, and when we're able to show that concern through our thoughts and our actions, we feel connected. And that is really a foundation for giving our life meaning. And in studies where kids track their own acts of kindness, they're more likely to be grateful and to do more acts of kindness. So we'll talk a little bit about that later, but questions, very basic questions to children like, who was kind to you today? How did it feel when that child was kind to you? Who were you kind to? To get them thinking and to start looking through a lens of kindness in their own lives. We actually seem to be hardwired for kindness, to show them, to demonstrate caring and sympathy for others. And the more acts of kindness we do, the more acts of kindness we want to do. There's a release of endorphins in our brain, and those are the feel-good hormones, and we just want to do more acts of kindness. When we see another person do an act of kindness, we get what's called a warm glow. We are more inclined to want to do more. So we'll talk about this as we remember the experiences that panelists, their children, their grandchildren had during the Holocaust, and we remember the lives of those who perished and those who survived, we will hopefully be able to focus on how kindness, emphasized kindness, really made a difference in the lives of these people. And we can continue the evolution of going from hate to kindness. So I'd like to ask Saul, if you will, if you could tell us a little bit about your background and where you grew up and what happened to you when the war started and you were interred in 1944 through your liberation in 1945. So if you can share a little bit about what was going on with you during those times, that would be great.
I was born in Hungary, and Hungary was able, for somehow Hungarian Jews were able to survive partially because some, all kind of different edicts and were instituted by the Hungarian government to make the Jews' life miserable and very, very difficult. But somehow we were able to survive till 1944. 1944 March, I think 14 or 15, the German army marched into Hungary, and with the German army, the fascist army came, of course, within a few days, Eichmann showed up, and he instituted the final solution very, very fast and very successfully with the cooperation of the Hungarian authorities, because they wouldn't be able to carry it out so fast and so efficiently without the local Hungarian authorities. So they were ready to assist Eichmann 100%. And it just happened to be at the time of exactly the way Passover is today. It falls in the same date practically. Today is the 5th or the 6th day of Passover. And we had fairly decent Seder that we were able to keep on the first days. And the last day of Passover, we were notified that you have to, next morning, you have to show up in the schoolyard, and you could take with you 20 pounds of belongings, and that's it. And that was the last day of Passover in 1944. And they transferred us to the nearest town, which was a bigger town, and they set us up in the shul, the Jewish temple, temporarily. And as they were collecting the Jews from a surrounding area, the temple was too small, and they transferred us to a brickyard. And that was terrible conditions. It was just a roof with no windows, no doors, and the conditions were very, very bad. And we spent approximately 4 weeks between the temple and they marched us off to the nearest railroad station where the cattle cars were there. And I really don't want to go in too much because most people that's on a panel and listening, they know all about the cattle cars, how horrible the condition was, with a bucket for water, a bucket for the waste, with 90 or 95 people in there. Was terrible, terrible conditions. And after 2.5 days or 3 days approximately, I don't know exactly how long we spent on that journey, because it was not too far away. Hungary, eastern part of Hungary wasn't that far away from Poland or Auschwitz. And we arrived to the train station, which was, of course, Birkenau. Terrible, chaotic situation. They were unloading the people, throwing them out of the railroad cars, people who couldn't move, SS dogs, whips, everything that anybody could mention. Also, some classical music in the background, and even some children's playing some playgrounds. So, but they disguised that people should be calm. They should know exactly what's going on. And we had to line up men in one line and women and children in the other line. And I stayed with my mother, my younger sister, and an older sister. And here were the very crucial things that happened. A Jewish prisoner who must have been there already for a while. He was working on a railroad detail, who were not allowed to talk to anybody, to the new arrivals. But he took a chance and he approached my mother and asked my mother how old I am. And my mother said, I was just bar mitzvah, I'm 13 years old. And he gave a whole story that I should go leave the line of the ladies, of the men, the ladies, and join the men's line. And if somebody's going to ask me that how old I am, I shouldn't say I'm 13. I should say I'm 18 years old. I'm ready to work and I'm strong. And he gave a whole story. Of course, I understood because he spoke Yiddish. And because I come from a Hasidic family, I spoke Yiddish myself. So I understood exactly what he was saying. And then I somehow, I paid very, very much attention to it. And I realized maybe this guy really knows what he's talking about. And I told my mom, but more the man was talking to my mom, stronger my mom was holding on to my hand. She doesn't want to let go. And sure enough, I told my mother that I'm going to find my father. But the line of the men was moving already. I couldn't find my father. And I wind up the end of the line. And some other kids my age, 12, 13, they were probably pulled out from their mother's arm the same way that I. And when we came to the point that the selection took place, because I was afraid to say I'm 18, I said I'm 16, and they let me go. Where I was going at that point, I didn't know. We came to a central location where they took our clothes and they shared our hair and disinfection, and I was looking for my father. So I asked people that I know from my town, they sent them to a different direction, which at that point we didn't know what the direction was, left or right, whatever it is. And another kid from my town, we were sticking together because we had nobody, no brother, no father, no uncles to join. So we were very much lost. And while we were in Birkenau and being processed, we wind up in that barrack, and a certain barrack for the night. And they suggested that we should tell our barrack commander or through age, and they should reunite us with our parents in Auschwitz, being processed already. That way, that's why still people did not realize what's going on. Mm-hmm. So it was a night time. He took us outside, this man. He was also maybe a French or Belgian Jew, and he spoke Yiddish. And he pointed to the chimney, and the chimney was in full blown, full blast of, yes. And he explained us that we don't have any parents anymore, and it did not register. We did not understand how the process was working. But anyway, he told us from now on, you should only one thing have in mind, to try to survive. If you see SS officers, stay out of sight. If you wind up on a job, today stay out of sight of people who are in charge of. So he gave us a good lesson, but did not register because it took quite a while before we completely processed the whole process, how that worked. And within 2 or 3 days, I was tattooed already with other kids, and we were transferred to Auschwitz from Birkenau. And maybe 240 kids, we were marched over about 10 kilometers, or about 8 miles approximately from Auschwitz. That was a satellite camp, and it was a coal mining camp. And us children, they needed, in the factory to select the coal when it comes up from a coal mine. It's not pure coal, has some stones in it. So they assigned us to those conveyor belts, was carrying the coal into the railroad cars under the factory. And we had to select, take out the stone separated from the coal. And that was our job. And I was there, I would say, from the time we were taking Leslie our Passover, 5 weeks later, I was already tattooed and wind up in that coal mining camp. Didn't take more than 5 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And we were lucky because we worked the shift from 12 to 12 at night. And we were never there with the selection. And besides that, we kids, we were in fairly good condition because we had some help, some food given in the factory, which was also Polish civilians also worked there. So our capo was a Polish political prisoner, and he made very good friends with the kitchen help, and they always bought some food for us, and so we were in fairly good condition. The only time we had to be in camp, interrupt our work in the factory, when somebody disappeared. I mean, somebody ran away from the camp, and he got caught, and of course it was a big hanging process. Everybody had to be there to watch the terrible situation, to show that that could happen if somebody, but we had no way to run anyway, so it was, but that was that we had to. And we worked in that factory till January 17, 1945, when the Russian army started to move because they want to get to Berlin before the Americans. So they started a very fast movement forward. And the Germans still wanted to have prisoners working for them. And then when a death march started. And
So thank you for that. You were about to, I think, talk about the death march. And my next question for you actually was, as you described these acts of kindness where people were, trying to help you, give you survival tips, right? And some people were getting more food, a bit more food, and you were with a group of kids, that you had a connection, that you made some kind of connection. And then you transitioned and talked about, the person who tried to escape and was hanged in front of everybody. During the war years, when you were experiencing and witnessing these examples of inhumanity and cruelty, what were your thoughts at that time as you were trying to survive?
I cannot exactly tell you because I was 13 years old.
Right.
And um, somehow we were conditioned because anti-Semitism was so strong, and we were bullied already in the schoolyard by kids, and we had nobody to complain to. If we went to our teacher to complain, they ignored it. They were probably happy that we were. So we were Jews, and besides that, learning the Bible and learning all the things that Jews went through in Egypt with the slavery. So as a child, there's this Jews lot in the world, that's what a Jew have to be suffering or something of that sort.
Yeah.
So we accepted it the way things were coming our way. Of course, it's always was there. The survivor instinct was always there.
Right. And then you had some of those engagements very early on with people who were trying to teach you how to survive. Thank you for that. I feel the next person who I would like to talk to and have talk to us is Robert, your son. And then I'm going to ask the same question of Helen and Julie. And it really is, when and how did you learn of your parents, in this case, Robert and Helen, and Julie, in your case, of your grandparents, their experiences as survivors of the Holocaust? And also, if you can share a bit with how their stories influenced you, and Robert, also your brother, as you grew up into adulthood, And then someone else had asked a question, do you think that your parents or your grandparents' history had any influence on what you ended up doing as your chosen career? But the first question is, when and how did you learn of your parents' or your grandparents' experiences as survivors?
Yeah.
So Robert, would you start?
Well, that's a tough act to follow.
Yes, it is indeed.
Look, I think initially it was a process of decryption. I mean, it was, first of all, we had to decrypt a foreign language, and, a lot of secrets were passed in Hungarian and maybe a little bit in Yiddish. But over time, once we began to decode this, this foreign narrative, this very alien narrative, it yielded a kind of an openness about these experiences. So the fragments of, quote, the camps and the war and these small towns that were wiped off the map, they became much more fully realized stories. And this was a family, and this of course included my grandparents, my father's in-laws, who were also survivors. And so what was constantly in the background moved to the foreground in remarkable ways. These were conspicuously good storytellers, and what started as a kind of fear of the unknown yielded a fascination with these tales of unimaginable suffering, but also survival, mixed in with, particularly in my grandfather's case, some outlandish humor, which was his own form of self-preservation, as it turned out. So that was sort of the first wave of learning about these experiences, and it became question on top of question on top of question that, in all honesty, continues to this day. I mean, in terms of no coincidence, I would say that my business is asking questions. So, and it was a environment where if you asked, you received, and which I view, frankly, as a great gift, because if this had been locked away in a vault, I think the emotional price would have been much greater, and the kind of balance that I think we achieved as a family would have been very elusive. I'll stop there.
Thank you for that, because in many families, these stories were not shared, and the questions were often not able to be asked or answered. So Helen, I ask you the same question about growing up in your family with your parents and your brother. When and how did you learn their story?
Right. I mean, having, coming with them as a 2-year-old from where I was born in Germany, in displaced persons camp, I was always aware of differences, and as Robert said, the language difference. I knew that there were secrets when my parents spoke in Polish. Generally, they spoke in Yiddish and later on in English. But so I knew that there were secrets. But when they would get together with other survivors, people that they had met in DP camp or people they'd known earlier, they would get together in the house, and I would sit at the bottom of the stairs and listen and piece together, learn from the camaraderie and from the questions and the stories they told each other. I would hear those stories and then use that information for asking questions. I was able to convince my father to write his memoir, and then in helping him to edit those, I became much more aware of the entire story. And there was a lot I did not know about my mother's experience, and it was difficult for me to ask her questions. She did not want to speak about it, and I think again, Robert made a point that where the stories were locked up, that was hurtful. I guess we know that now as post-traumatic stress disorder. That had an impact on my mother's health. But so I guess I always knew, but it evolved and I learned more and more.
And what was your chosen profession?
Oh, me? I'm a teacher, an educator, a school principal, a teacher, lifelong learner and teacher.
Right. So Julie, about your grandparents, how did you learn, and what stories were the ones that really influenced you as you grew into your adulthood?
Yeah, thank you. I'm trying to remember actually if there was a moment, which I'm having trouble kind of pinning that down. It really feels like it was just a part of our family's past and who my grandparents and my mother and uncle were. My grandfather, I think from a young age had the number tattooed on his arm, and that always evoked questions from kids to ask and be inquisitive. And he was very open about sharing in appropriate ways, from a young age with us. And he was much like a hero-like figure to us because it was so unbelievable for what he endured, and trying to even put some sense to that, growing up in a more typical life here in the US. So my grandmother, though, wasn't as comfortable sharing. It was much more difficult for her. And actually, I do remember when she was interviewed by the Shoah Foundation many years, well, not many years later, but just not, again, learning much earlier from my grandfather. And just overhearing her in that interview and learning so much there. Somehow in that setting, she was really able to open up and get more into the details of her experience.
Yeah, that's not uncommon. If we talk about the kindness, sometimes people didn't want to bring the stories that were so challenging and so difficult to recall into their families, but yet to tell a stranger and have it be available for posterity is a different environment. It's a different experience. Julie, you've been telling your grandfather's story to students in classrooms for these past couple of years. Can you tell us a little bit about your grandfather and his childhood and his wartime experiences that you share with these kids?
Yeah. So two of as I mentioned, my maternal grandparents were both survivors. My grandfather was from Vienna, Austria. My grandmother actually was from Sziget, Hungary. But I've been focusing on sharing my grandfather's story, and will hopefully soon also be telling that of my grandmother. But particularly related to my grandfather, he was born in Vienna, Austria in 1922. He had already suffered loss at an early age, though, and had some struggles that he had to overcome. At age 5, he had lost his mother, and his family didn't have a lot of money. So his father had to send him to an orphanage where he lived until his father actually remarried and had the financial means to kind of bring him back and care for him. But, he even reflected on that time positively. And anyway, from there, I'll just give you kind of some of the chronology. He, though, began working in a factory at a very young age to help support his family. In 1938, he did lose his job when Austria was absorbed by Nazi Germany. And then from there, he went to live on a farm. He was a farmhand, but again, very shortly after was forced to flee because you had to present papers that you weren't Jewish. And of course he couldn't. And then from there, he was in 2 different labor camps, and there he still had some freedoms, not many, but some of the freedoms at that point. But one night he had snuck out with some friends to go to a movie. They were caught, and actually they were arrested. He was imprisoned and put in solitary confinement for a year because Jews weren't allowed to be in the movie theaters at that time. And then from there, after a year in solitary confinement, he was taken by train to his first concentration camp, or the first concentration camp that he survived, which was Flossenburg. And he spent about a year there. In 1942, he was shipped to Auschwitz, where he actually worked in Birkenau as part of what was called the Canada Commando. And then he was sorting through the belongings of the incoming prisoners there. He was moved to a labor camp then to help clean up the Warsaw Ghetto. They were trying to repurpose the stones and all the rubble and the materials that had fallen from the buildings that had been destroyed. And then later, 1944, he was brought on a 2-day march to Dachau, where he was a laborer for 8 months. And then finally, I'm trying to move quickly because there's a lot of pieces here, but he was taken to Mulhdorf concentration camp. They were building German rocket silos, and he was a capo there, actually. And 1945, he was rescued from a train by American soldiers, and then lived in Feldenfing in a displaced person camp. And there he met my grandmother. My mother was born in that camp in 1946. And then they left Germany for New York in 1947.
We have some pictures from Julie. Glenn, would you share those pictures, and then later on we'll share some pictures from Saul. Julie, you mentioned that your father had several jobs, and what the second job was as a capo. A capo. So yeah, I love the Julie's grandfather's quote here.
I didn't mention as well that they both lived here in South Florida, and my grandfather passed only 3 years ago. So he was very vocal and always shared his story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing these pictures with us.
Helen, did you want me to? I can wait, or.
Yeah, I know that you had mentioned some events where you had met prisoners who had been under the supervision of your grandfather, and what their reaction was when they saw him here in this country.
It was actually my grandmother who always shared, and it was in the DP camp. As many of you might know, the capos were not always, they didn't treat the prisoners always so well. And I guess he was somebody who did, and he always really maintained his sense of humanity, I think, throughout these horrible experiences. But my grandmother always retold how others in the DP camp threw themselves at his feet, thanking him for saving their lives.
So when you think of your grandfather, you think of him as a person who was able to stay connected to people and see their humanity at great cost to himself.
I think.
Yes, what were you saying?
No, I think there were a lot of small moments throughout his experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he intentionally sought those out of where he could still keep that connection and that sense of humanity.
So as your parents and grandparents, this is again for all of you, and I think I'll go back to you, Robert, to start. The science tells us that kindness is instinctual. Parents are wise to model kindness for their children. Growing up in your families, what was it that was able to, how was kindness manifested in your home? Your parents and grandparents suffered greatly. And when we notice and positively reinforce kinds of acts of kindness in our children, you know, we're encouraging them to exercise their kindness muscle, basically. And how all of this gets transmitted and absorbed is a bit of a mystery, really. But in your case, in all of your cases, can you share a specific event or a memory that would help us understand how you learned about kindness from your parents and your grandparents?
I don't know that there was anything formulaic about it,
Okay.
other than to say, with my grandparents in particular, the sort of unconditional love, the affection you could feel from them, despite whatever baggage they had, that was really, life altering, I would say, without any question. And then, but beyond that, and this is very much top of mind, you talk about empathy, you talk about communication. These were values that were conveyed just in a quotidian way, and it was all founded on the ability to look toward the future, not to be
Yes.
trapped by the trauma, the pain of the past. And that became, I don't know that it was ever communicated in those days, but
Yes.
it was demonstrated clearly. And I'd say that maybe most dramatically during a trip that we made with my father to Weimar, to Buchenwald, to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the liberation of the camp. And I will tell you that I didn't really know how that trip was going to go when I thought about it, but we got there, and against all odds became a celebration of life, the ingathering of survivors with their children and grandchildren, all there essentially to flip their middle finger at the Germans, or the Nazis, for what they attempted to do and failed at. And I remember we closed the bar at the Weimar Hilton that night. But it wasn't just that. I mean, we spent, and my father could speak to this, or I'll preview it anyway. We spent a lot of time talking to young German high school and college students who were deeply interested in understanding their past,
Yes.
who we could not in any way, and I'll speak for my father on this point, with no enmity, no hostility, nothing but interest toward them, appreciation, and very clearly demarcating the sins of the fathers from the actions of the children. So that's what I mean by communication, by empathy, by the ability not to be trapped by the traumas
Yes.
of the past.
And to show that resilience and that hopefulness,
Mhm.
and you saw it in action when you were there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Helen, do you have something
Yeah,
that you remember?
Feeling my father's and mother's love and kindness, as a child. That was also daily evidence. But there were also some individual lessons that I remember. I remember one time fighting over the last piece of cake with my brother. We both loved, we're fressers. We loved to eat, and I was probably preteen, and he was younger, and we were fighting over the last piece of cake. And my father had cut it to share, and then so we shared, and then there was another piece left to share, and I started to grab it, and I said, "That's too small to share." And my father said, "There's nothing that's too small to share." And so it wasn't just the daily, love that we had, and I also saw it as I was older. My father became business partners with a German, so he, had absolutely no enmity for the Germans, and also, like Robert, had an opportunity to travel with my parents to Poland and see how they interacted with the non-Jewish Poles, which was again with loving kindness and with compassion and with humanity, and so it came across in daily ways, and also in little lessons. Oh, and also something I had mentioned to you, Dale, in talking earlier. My mother was a good judge of character, and
Yes.
she let me know which of my peers she didn't want me to have as friends, and which were okay to have as friends. And as I look back, I think the kindness was one of the criteria that she was using.
Yeah, I think that I would agree with that about her, having known her and your dad when we were kids. I think that these examples are, I think the thing that is so outstanding and really stands out is being able to integrate the entire experience, but not have it really determine how your parents and grandparents were moving forward, that they were going to move forward in spite of what happened. They were going to be kind, include kindness, teach kindness by the way they interacted with you and with others, and that they were going to stop that hate and move forward with compassion. And I think that that's really remarkable as you give those examples. Julie, was there anything that you cared to add in that sense of the kindness that you saw and that was part of your upbringing, and and how they expected you to be kind or still do?
Yeah, I think it echoes what's already been said. It was really love and adoration. And I think my grandfather had a wonderful perspective on life. And even I think throughout his experiences in the camps and what he endured, it was really about living in the moment and not thinking about tomorrow and all of the what ifs. He always said it was 99.9% luck, but the rest was this perspective where he was able to just find those small moments and, certainly afterward, just appreciate each day. So,
If I might, I'd like to offer
Yes.
just one countervailing view here, though, which is as we focus on kindness, it's worth remembering, though, that there was a yin to the yang, which was the education in Hobbesian and Darwinian human nature was also important. And growing up in this environment was a crash course in understanding what people were capable of. So I think it's worth remembering that was the other part of the curriculum.
It certainly was. And it was also the next question, which really had to do with this particular generation of survivors. They lost their parents at an early age. They experienced incredible trauma, chronic and intense trauma. And after liberation, they married and they raised their children. And many of them didn't have a model for child rearing since they didn't experience being parented into adulthood. They had, as your dad said, Saul, and you can speak to this, memories and lovely memories of growing up in an extended family, but being parented into adulthood, they didn't have. And as your dad said also, as Saul said in school, people were the objects of hate. There was enormous anti-Semitism, living in fear from a very, very young age, and constantly being degraded and dehumanized and tortured, and seeing people they loved killed. And yet somehow they were able to still transmit this culture of kindness in the family. So the question really is, how do you think that happened? And you've answered it a lot, but also as you tell your parents and your children and your grandparents' stories to children and children you have, what are the essential points that you want to be sure that you share? What are the lessons that you think you've learned from their stories? And I think, Saul, you were actually going to say something before. You've heard your son talk about his experience of you as a loving father. Was it intentional for you? Is it just who you are? To just have a loving, caring, decent family and family life.
Well,
And
I had very little experience because when I lost my family, I was only 13 years old.
Yes.
And I only had recollections of being part of a Hasidic family and a Hasidic community in a small village. And it was very, very, very lovely environment, even though I never remember hearing my father telling me I love you,
Mhm.
which I do in every telephone call with my kids or grandkids that I've called today.
Yes.
So but it somehow it rubbed off on you somehow,
Yes.
and it stayed with me all my life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It stayed with me all my life, and I a little bit my behavior and my whole life was a little bit different than most of the mature survivors, because I survived. When I survived, I was already altogether 14 years old.
Yes.
So um, I always had to look forward for the next day and for the future. I had nothing to look back at.
Yes. There
So
was a question that came in the chat, and it had to do with when you went to Israel, and then what was it that brought you to America?
when I went to Israel, that was something to look forward. When I was picked up with the Zionist organization in Budapest, it was something, first of all, something to look forward, something to fight for, and something to hope for, because Israel was 3 years away from becoming a state.
Yes.
And our whole conditioning was, soon as Israel becomes a state, we have a state, and we have to go and fight for it and take part, um, you know, with all the social connections that they teached us. And we were looking forward. That was something to look forward. So I'll never look back.
And then what brought you to America?
But first of all, I was a 25-year-old single man. I want to see the world, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And I was only, and I had no family in Israel. I had a brother and sister who got stuck in Hungary during the communist regime. And I had two sisters who survived. One wound up from Bergen-Belsen to Sweden. And they came here, and I started to correspond with them. I sent a couple of pictures that you saw, some of them
Yes.
there, and they were really started to bombard me with letters and please come and see. And I figured I'm gonna come and see them and stay for a while and go back, of course. But things happened. I met a lady, we got married, and you don't leave so fast.
Right.
This is a
Right.
good time for us to see some of Saul's pictures.
I had nothing from my childhood, not even from my parents, absolutely nothing.
Right. Well, while Glenn is queuing that up, Julie, maybe you can answer one of the questions in the chat. How did you get the pictures, the before the war pictures of your grandfather's family?
Yeah. Yep. No.
That's my Rob's mom, my first wife.
Mm-hmm.
We were married for 44 years, and unfortunately, we lost her. And here we are, the three of us, and my second wife, who I unfortunately lost 8 months ago in Florida, in Miami Beach.
Yes.
And that's Robert and myself and my daughter-in-law, Leah, his lovely wife. And here the two of us with Robert. I don't know exactly where it was.
That's in Budapest.
This is in Budapest. Okay.
Okay, so
This was 3 years ago. And this is graduation, my grandson's graduation in Baltimore, who is graduating this time from NYU School of Cinema. He's next to me. And this was during the pandemic. We got together in an outdoor restaurant a year ago for lunch, I think. And that's my wife, my daughter-in-laws. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So, Julie,
Thank you.
how did you get the pictures before the war pictures? Was the question that we had.
So actually, when my grandfather's father, or my great grandfather, I guess, remarried, the woman he married was not Jewish, and so she actually had converted to Judaism. And then during the war, you know, it still protected him. She converted back actually, because it protected my grandfather's father and her during the war. So he was interrogated and beaten up and, you know, taken by the police for nights. But he was never taken into the concentration camps. And they actually both survived. When my grandfather left Germany, you know, he went and saw them one last time and just felt like, or he went to Austria to see them and just felt like there was nothing left for him to stay for there, that he needed to move and start a new life. But anyway, that's how they had the photos.
Well, thank you for sharing them. Julie, when you're talking to the students in the classrooms, what are some of the reactions that they have and some of the comments that they share with you when you're teaching them?
I think for the most part, hearing the personal stories and the experiences, and just those connections of, you know, that somebody actually endured this versus learning it from a book. You know, some of them has seen survivors speak, but many haven't. Some of the students weren't familiar with this period of time, but luckily when we're speaking a lot, the teacher is already doing some instruction before we arrive.
How old are the students you're addressing?
6th through 12th grade is primarily. So it's been we've spoken to about 2,000 students so far since we've got started with this.
That's great. You know, we've been having this conversation about kindness emerging from hate and just how that happens in families and hopefully in the world. Let's see. We are all stunned by the reemergence of hatred, particularly the rise of anti-Semitism in this country and the world. And I just wanted to, before we end this evening, get each of your ideas and your thoughts about where you stand on this. Where are you with where we are with the rise of anti-Semitism, and what would you share with us, given what you know about your parents and your grandparents' histories? Any one of you can start. Robert, do you want to start?
I mean, I think it starts with vigilance, and combined with a real sense, an inherited sense that the worst really can happen. And so to say, to be on guard is borders on cliche, but it's really true. I think we have to be extremely cognizant of the political tectonics and who is controlling power and how, and be willing to act when called upon. I mean, that's sort of the simple way of putting it.
Thank you. Helen, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think that my choice of career really stemmed from knowing my parents' experiences, and I went into school leadership. Also, left teaching to go into school leadership because I think that the adults in the building set the are the role models who have to teach kindness. By their expression of love and caring for the students, for the young people, and also by monitoring and throwing their hands up when they see hate, when they see man's inhumanity to man, when they see bullying, whatever goes on. And now that I'm retired, I have the luxury of being able to focus all of my professional volunteerism on Holocaust education and on education at large. And so I will continue to teach kids that genocide is at one end of a spectrum, But at the other end of a continuum, at the other
Yes.
end of that continuum is seeing another as less than, seeing another human being as less than. And if they can understand and give each person the love and dignity that each human being deserves, then we can make a better world. And it's our job to make a better world.
And Julie, I understand that your 14-year-old daughter, Rebecca, is in this audience tonight. It would be interesting to see, she is the 4th generation, and what her thoughts are on this issue, if she would be willing to join in.
She's actually in the audience, but not in this room, because she was, I apologize, I let Helen know, but she was running a little late from after school.
Okay.
Practice. But
Okay.
I can maybe
You
answer
can speak
to that
for her,
too.
right?
Yeah.
And also yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, to answer in one word too, I think concern is my feeling of the current state of affairs, and largely the work we're doing with 3G Miami was really to create a voice, to educate, create awareness, and create a dialogue amongst kids about standing up to hatred of all kinds. And with her, I have two teenage kids, one who's a little younger still, but and so they're hearing a lot of this work, coming to events with me, and they really feel like there's an opportunity and a need amongst their peers to have a voice and to change the dialogue.
Yes.
And misinformation. So I think she's particularly kind of examining that and thinking about what her role in continuing to share these stories with that larger goal in mind.
Well, the 4th generation also has a job to do. There was a question which links it now about how we are. I don't see the question anymore. It had to do with Russia and Ukraine.
Right.
And I can't see it. So Helen, if you see it,
Here,
maybe
yeah,
you can.
Yeah. If you have
Thanks.
time, can we ask the question about what we are seeing, what Russia's doing to Ukraine, and does that bring back unpleasant memories by what your parents and grandparents experienced?
So Saul, can you
Yes.
address that?
That's a very unpleasant memories. Is not the question. It's horrible memories.
Yes.
That
Yes.
plays out day after day, hour by hour. That it's terrifying, and it's unbelievable for me, and for anybody that experienced World War II, being Jewish or not being Jewish, being a refugee. It's 80 years later, it plays out again in such a brutal way. It's terrifying. I have a very hard time with it.
Yes.
And I know our experience, the soil is soaked with Jewish blood to begin with.
Yes.
And but I'm very proud and I'm very happy to see that all Jewish organizations in the world, including Israel and the United States, are there to help everybody and anybody.
Yes.
And that's the most happiest feeling that I have about it, because we were completely abandoned by the whole world. And the most amazing thing is also that the Ukrainian nation and the Polish nation, they were enemies for centuries. They were fighting and killing each other. And what a tremendous change took place in the Polish population to accept all these refugees.
Yes.
So something happened that they're not their grandfather's generation. It's a new, and something is happening in the world. And let's hope that something good will come out of it, because it's terrifying what's going on.
We have some questions in the chat too.
Yes, we have a couple of more minutes. We can take them.
Okay.
Can you read them, Helen? I can't see them.
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, so there's some comments, a lot of comments, thanking us for the stories and the photos. There was a question from Victor for Robert and Julie. Do you think you are affected by epigenetics? You know, the
I mean,
whole.
that's I'm not sure how to answer that. And you know, trying to calculate how your subconscious has been impacted by you know, exposure, learning all of this is hard to figure. So whether or not there are actually changes in the DNA and physical changes that are being passed on, it's probably unknowable at this point. Maybe we'll learn more in decades to come, but
Yeah, there's some research
Julie,
being
any
done now,
thoughts
but
on
we
that?
don't know.
Yeah, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, you know, a lot of my work focuses around wellness, particularly even working recently with some geneticists who, you know, who've spoken on this topic as well. So yeah, I mean, I certainly believe in kind of understanding the science and the research behind it, but I can't necessarily pinpoint which traits, you know, certainly anxiety and, you know, but who knows what
Right.
what came from where, I guess. There's no causality to be.
I mean, I like to think, without at the risk of fetishizing this history, I like to think that resilience is also something, is the superpower. I mean, if there's a lesson that I take away, and if I ever have to tap that energy, that's what I gravitate to. So what I can see in my family that is discernible, is concrete, is resilience, and that there is no trauma, or virtually no trauma, that that can stop you, and that's quite a lesson.
And I was really, Victor asked the question. Victor also is a child of survivors. I feel the same way, Robert, as you do, that whatever genes I got from my parents, the strength and the resilience genes came forth. And you know, hopefully I'll be able to live the long, healthy lives that they lived, despite the tremendous trauma and ongoing chronic trauma they experience.
And you also witnessed, all of you witnessed, how they went through and then went on. And I think that's the fact that your parents talked about some of their experiences with you, and you saw how it was part of their weave, but they had hope and they had empathy, and they didn't hold the next generation responsible, yet are vigilant to see what else is going on in the world. And I think that all of that is part of that resilience package, right? You know, I think that one of the things is when we feel overcome with pain and when we feel hopeless, you know, we turn away from blaming others and try to have empathy and move forward. And what I'm getting from this conversation is it's really through the compassion and understanding and learning that each of us can participate in to really deal with the anger and the hate and say, no, I'm not going to choose that. I'm going to choose this. Because you all mentioned hope that you saw in your parents and your grandparents, and you all mentioned resilience, and you all mentioned a kindness, you know, and a role modeling of kindness. And so I think that it's very promising. At the same time, the vigilance, and to show this next generation as they are watching the news and learning about Ukraine and Russia, you know, we're not going to make the same mistake again. Hopefully, what Saul said is so powerful that people who have been fighting and fighting for so long are now welcoming one another. And you are saying, we're going to stop that trend. We're going to see the humanity in one another. And I think that that's a hope.
Dale, there's another question in the chat. Is kindness advantage allowed in Florida schools and other libraries?
What a wonderful question. What a wonderful question. Well, there is a chapter of children who are gay, so I'm not so sure it's going to be allowed in Florida.
Right.
So yeah, The Kindness Advantage is a book that was written by Amanda Solzauer and I. Amanda Solzauer happens to be my niece as well as my colleague. And it really came out of a desire to try and address the rise in bullying, the rise in hate, the rise in otherizing other people. And it is being used as part of curriculum in many, many, many school systems in the country. So we're really proud of that. As far as Florida and Texas, we actually have been in the schools in Florida and Texas. But that's
Well,
that's a whole other webinar.
Maybe while I make some closing comments, Dale, maybe you can post the website for the book in the chat.
Oh, thank you, but I don't seem to be accessing the chat. That was my
okay.
problem. But
Okay.
thank you. I would appreciate that.
Well,
it's called The Kindness Advantage.
Okay.
Here it is.
So
thank you, Ellen. That's very kind.
I want to thank all of our panelists, Dale, Saul, Rob, Julie, for sharing your thoughts with us this evening. We were able to present programs such as today's webinar through the generosity of our donors. If you've enjoyed our program and if you share our belief in the importance of Holocaust education and remembrance, please consider making a tax-deductible contribution through our website, www.nextgenerations.org. You'll also find information on the website about our future programs. We're currently in the process of confirming our programs for 2022, 2023. So if you check back at our website in late May, we should have our calendar up and running. Among some of the programs that we're working on are a live reading of the play Wagon, about a family's experiences being transported during the Holocaust, a virtual tour of the Auschwitz concentration camp. This is a program we did last year. We had to limit it to an audience of 50 because it was an interactive program. A tour guide from Auschwitz is the one that does this virtual tour. It's incredible. So we're looking forward to offering it again to a small group. And then we're also going to be doing a presentation on how to research family members who've lost their lives or survived concentration camps in the Holocaust. So we have many programs planned for the coming year, and we thank all of you for being here tonight. And a special thank you and hugs and kisses to Dale and Saul and Rob. I look forward to meeting you when you come to Florida. And Julie, thank you. And look forward to our next efforts together. This program was co-sponsored by 3G Miami. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you all. Take good care and have a good rest of Passover. I hope to see you all again. Hag Sameach.